Welcome to the Legendarium Green Team. I'm your host, Kyptan, and with me today are Eradandis.
Hello.
And Little Red Book.
Hi, everyone.
Today we'll be discussing Brightness Reef, the 1995 science fiction classic by David Brin, fourth published book of the Uplift Saga, start of the Uplift Storm trilogy. It was nominated for both the Hugo and Locus Awards for Best Novel. Because this is the start of the Uplift Storm trilogy and an entry point to the Uplift universe, and because there's a lot to talk about, we're going to be covering just the first half of the book today, ending with Chapter 15. We'll be starting the episode with general notes about the setting and themes of the book without spoilers. Then we'll transition into talking about spoilers for the first half of the book, including Chapter 15. Okay, so talking about the interesting publishing history of the Uplift series, when do you all think this book should be read? Should it be read first? Should it be read fourth? Could it be read second? What do you all think?
I would say second or third because you can skip Sundiver. So just taking that off the table, I would say second or third.
But you think it would be good to have a grounding in the Uplift universe before you start the series?
I think you should read Startide Rising before you read this book.
Okay. Hera?
I think it can be read in any order. I would view Startide Rising as the Hobbit to the Uplift Storm, to the Fellowship of the Ring, which would be the Uplift Storm. So
that's a great take.
So you can read it as background, but I don't think you don't need it at first, but you'll eventually want to go back and fill it in. Having said that, I would prefer you read Startide Rising, Uplift more, and then get into Brightness.
I pretty much advocate for publishing order in any series.
Except Sundiver.
Except Sundiver. I mean, and I'm talking about series in general, not just this series.
Sure. I read this one first as a kid, and although I definitely enjoyed reading this one first because there was so much mystery, I was like, okay, I really need to get my hands on Startide Rising at some point. What library has this so I can nab it?
When we get to the second episode, not this one, I really want to hear your thoughts of what you thought about the end of this, having not read Startide Rising. You might have to cut that. Sorry.
I mean, just the start of this book, honestly. We start with a man burning in a swamp, and we have no context for that.
No, it was a great opening.
And it's a great little opening and central mystery for most of the book. It's great.
And he's got a big hole in his head.
Big hole in his head. Yep.
I know we don't want to talk a lot about Startide Rising, but I'm curious, your first experience with Startide Rising, having read Brightness Reef first, were you more excited about it? Were you disappointed with it?
I was like, oh, wow, this is different. This is very different. And I think it is important to note that while Startide Rising, while not exactly a standard sci-fi novel, because it is an excellent sci-fi novel, it does fit more of the standard tropes of a sci-fi novel, whereas Brightness Reef, it feels more like a combination of sci-fi with the Swiss Family Robinson.
Yeah, and actually, like, one of the tropes it kind of leans into that's a more common fantasy trope is that whole the past was greater type of thing. Does that make sense? It's one of the things that I mentioned.
I mean, unless you talk to a Trekkie.
Well, yeah, that's true. But just like the hidden knowledge of the past type thing and trying to discover that.
It's interesting you said Swiss Family Robinson, because I thought you were going to go for the low-hanging fruit, which they say in the book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. That's what this story is. And then
there's a little 20,000 leagues into
The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is like, I would think that there are adults and more mature scenes and situations going on, which I think evoke more of the ingenuity and inventiveness of Swiss Family Robinson. Ingenuity in the tropics, basically.
Well, and there's a heavy dose of political intrigue too.
Sure. But we were talking about when this book should be read and what it's like and how to prepare people for it being different from other ones in the series. And I think that's probably a good basis to start with. You can read this book first, you can read it second, you can read it third or fourth. It's the last chance you have to get in on the Uplift series before we start the actual sequels.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
I agree with that. They're all standalone novels until you get to the Uplift Storm.
Yep.
But I have not read the other books, so I don't really have an opinion on that, I guess.
Well, all you need to know is that they're direct sequels to this one.
Okay, that's fair.
Here's what I would say is that I think if you were to read Startide Rising first, you would have a deeper understanding of what would essentially be Easter eggs or callbacks to that book going into Brightness Reef.
That's exactly what I meant.
But you can read Brightness Reef without having read Startide Rising, go back and go, oh, that's what that was. So that's all.
Honestly, this series benefits from a reread no matter what order you read it in.
Agree.
So don't worry too much about it. Okay, let's move on to style. There might not be as many haikus as there were in Startide Rising, but Brin always brings stylistic flair to his books. In Brightness Reef, I think the two notable examples are the reimagination of chapters and the fascinating epigraphs. Let's talk about the chapter structure first. How do you think it influences the story, and why do you think Brin did it? And what do you love about it if you love it, and what do you hate about it if you hate it?
Red, you want to go first?
I'm not sure what Kip is driving at exactly.
Okay.
But
so I could explain a little bit.
Well,
I can tell you what I think
let me give it my answer and see if I'm addressing what you're driving at.
Sure.
So one of the interesting things that I found, and I do enjoy about it, is that the chapters are viewpoint switching, but also changes tense for some of the viewpoints and changes first person, third person. So certain characters have a first person viewpoint and are written as a journal. There's also asks, or however we're going to say that. And that's written present and as an internal dialogue, as opposed to, and then the Lark and Drew and Sarah all have Dwyer. Okay. All have third person viewpoints. And then we have the stranger's viewpoint, which is very, well, it's heartbreaking for one.
It's introspective and wordless.
And surreal. It's very surreal.
Yeah.
So was that what you were driving at?
That's exactly what I was driving at.
Okay.
You covered pretty much all the topics. Let's go deeper into some of them. Let's talk about trachy thought patterns a little bit. Let's talk about how our first passage of the second chapter is in this entirely alien narrator structure.
It's your turn, Era. I already talked.
Okay, so look, I guess a callback to what you guys had earlier said. I think the stranger, if you read Startide Rising, is a callback to Krydeki a little bit in terms of the thought pattern. So I thought that was interesting.
Yep.
In terms of asks, the trachea, what I liked about that was obviously it's the predecessor to one of the bigger galactic species in the Uplift universe, and I like how it's a communal intelligence, and it's a more contemplative intelligence. They act, but they act slowly after a lot of deliberation. So I really like the way Brin uses that as a way to explore memory and to explore like how I guess the trachea functions as almost like the community historian, I guess, for lack of a better word.
We have the map of the book, and then the very first words of the book are asks deciding to name itself and tell the story. And it's almost Homeric, but it's such an alien version of a narratory introduction. I just love it. And it really sets the tone for, okay, this isn't going to be a book about reskinned humanoids with like forehead ridges that act and behave exactly like more aggressive or less aggressive humans, which seems to be the standard scale on which we judge alien cultures, apparently.
Are you trashing Star Trek right now?
I am slightly trashing shows like Star Trek.
But it's harder, in fairness to Star Trek, it's harder to do that in a visual format.
The makeup and visual format required for a TV show is very different.
I feel like we cover this in both Startide Rising and Uplift War, because that, to me, one of the creative geniuses of the Uplift universe is that Brin makes a deliberate effort. Every time we're introduced to an alien species, that alien species is alien.
Yeah.
They're different from humans, and they're different from each other in large part in terms of thought patterns, even if they may be held together by culture or philosophy or other things.
Well, and that's part of what they're doing with the languages. Like there's 10 different galactic languages,
Yes.
but the different aliens use different galactic languages. And when he writes them talking or speaking in those languages, you can feel the difference of those
That's true.
languages.
I love when Alvin and Huck are talking in like one of the more formal galactic languages, and there's parenthetical implications before the verbs or nouns. And it's so precise, but also clearly stylized.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Bryn has a way with words. I'm just going to say it.
He does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's interesting what we're talking about the languages now, because it's actually a point that Bryn has made in his previous books a little bit more subtly. And then he kind of, especially in this first part, hits you over the head with it.
Like, how often have you wished that you could put a parenthetical into one of your statements?
That'd
Like
be great.
in speech.
So Bryn has, he makes a point that the Anglic language, what the humans use, they use it in a way to empathize with other people. It's a different mode of thought. Whereas all these galactic languages are very logical, rational, formal methods of communication that do not convey empathy or the ability to put yourself in another one's shoes. And that seems to be the recurrent theme of this is what these humans can do that other societies are just unable to do, which is to empathize. Oh, if I were a hoon, I would act like this.
We'll get into detailed conversation about the language in a later episode.
Well, and I
promise you it's coming.
There's two other things. You can pun in Anglic, but you can't in any of the galactic languages.
That's true.
Well, and which harkens back to Kip's favorite species. It's not in this book. And also it's more abstract, whereas the galactic languages are much more a mode to convey information, if that makes sense, as opposed to relate.
Getting back to chapter structure.
But that's a big part of it, because it's a part of and part of what's fun about this is I feel like after reading the first 3 books, I feel like Bryn's come out to play. Now we're going to play with tense. Now we're going to play with voice.
Which is why I enjoy that we get a Trekkie headspace like every other point of view.
And let me emphasize this, because you mentioned the Trekkie, and I want to piggyback on your chapter structure because I think there's a couple other points to bring up with this. One, when I was reading it this time around, my impression was that every time the Trekkie was brought up and the tense he was using, the Trekkie chapters were meant as interludes between the other chapters.
That's exactly what they are. Yeah. They're literally like every other chapter, except occasionally he'll be replaced by the stranger.
Right.
That's right. And then the other thing, which look, the only other author I can think of off the top of my head that does this as well as Bryn would be Glenn Cook, and that he uses chapter length deliberately. If he wants to speed up the pacing, you'll get 2 or 3 chapters basically in 5 pages. If he wants to slow down the pacing, your chapter may be 15 or 20 pages. So I think the actual structure in terms of like the actual length of the chapters is something that Bryn took a lot of care in crafting this book.
And we also get roughly equal time, or at least equal chapter number, between the family of Nilo and Alvin and his group of friends. We roughly swap back and forth every other chapter between those two. So we get Lark, Dwyer, and Sarah, and then we get Alvin with Huck and Uran and Pincertip and all those lovely people. And it sets up basically 2 main groups of people, and then we'll occasionally get like bits of the stranger and bits of Reddy and things like that. But this is really 2 books woven into one, giving us 2 distinct groups of people that we're watching, and then one of those groups of people splits up into 3 separate ones. So it can be a bit tricky to remember that you're actually following 2 separate groups when it feels like 4, but that's what's happening.
I disagree slightly. I think you're following 3 groups. And
3
the
groups.
Third group, yes, the third group is encapsulated by what you call the epigraphs.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I call them the mini prologues because each one of those is intended to add depth to Jijo, the world you're in, and the culture. And so to me, those were my favorite parts of the book. They're like found records, historical archives type of thing. So
You mind if I step in here with my next question?
Sure.
Because
Go
it's
ahead.
exactly what you're talking about. Okay, let's talk about the epigraphs. Some are published academic works, and others are from the sacred scrolls. Epigraphs are usually used to draw contrast or tension between the characters and the reader. They can also give the reader context that the characters would already know. In Brightness Reef, this is often how we get primary and secondary sources about history and religion, which helps clue us into the major social conflicts of the slope. What was your favorite epigraph, and what did you think they added to the story?
So I have to name a favorite?
You don't have to name a favorite if you don't remember it.
I can name a
I
favorite.
think I can name a favorite, but
Okay.
I like them all. I enjoyed the scroll ones just for cluing me in on how the interplay between the six sets. But I think my favorite is the one that's the historical record of when the humans first land
Oh,
and how they bring all this new knowledge. And I think I actually wrote down part of the quote. Just a minute. Into this maelstrom of superstition, they not only brought paper books, but also tools of logic and verification, the very things that they had fought hardest to learn back home. And then it goes on to talk about how they start collecting all the myths of Jijo, and they bring the tension between like hard knowledge and the power of myth into the story. Like that whole epigraph is about that. And that's what I really liked about it.
That's nice. I agree with
yep. I do like the ones that draw attention to how much humanity changed / added to the mix of the races of the slope.
What's your favorite, Kip? I'm gonna let Kip go
So-
next.
Okay. My favorite is from chapter 12, The Book of the Slope, from Reflections on the Six by Uvum Press, Year of Exile 1915. And it's the one about how the Trachea ask people not to say the word Jofur. And it's a slight reflection about the difference between the Trachea that everyone on the slope knows, these lovable, indecisive piles of rings that are almost completely harmless, and the genocidal maniacs of the Jofur,
Which we meet.
which we've met in previous books.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, could not be more different. That's a good one too.
Yep.
I would say mine. So I like them all. So it's really, really tough. You're asking me like to pick my favorite child type of thing. If I had to pick one, I would say the folk tale about the Hoon, hunter, who went and very patiently and slowly winnowed that group of people who had violated the terms of the slope, and they kind of slowly winnowed them because it showed the ruthlessness of the people on the slope to enforce their edict, and two, it showed the alienness of the Hoon, because the Hoon was patient to a degree that humans are simply incapable of being. And so I thought that was, good. This isn't going to be a sugar-coated history kind of thing that we're going to get every time with Bryn. He may say it in a way that, that's kind of cool, but then you sit down and think about it for 30 seconds, and you're like, oh wow, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, and not to speak about it too much at length, but there's a clear parallel to another incident in the larger Uplift universe involving the Hoon and humans.
I do want to mention one more that I really liked, which was the folk tale of the Kakek who rode around the sun.
Oh, the Icarus myth.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, this is Icarus. And I just thought that
you love folk tales that are universal among people.
I do.
You do.
What can I say? I mean, Frankenstein in a lot of ways is the Icarus myth, just reworked.
I do love the analog of Icarus reimagined within a Dyson sphere, though.
Yeah, that was cool. I liked it.
That's an entirely different story.
I guess, to me, what I like the most, just generally what we're talking about here, what I like the most about these mini prologues is that each one adds depth to the story without taking away from the main storyline itself. And that's really, really hard to do. And he's doing them in a paragraph chunk or a page chunk at a time to kind of give you a feeling of this is an old world, and these people have gone through a lot to get to the society and culture that they're in.
Yeah, and it avoids Captain Exposition, which is
exactly
something that is very, very common.
I love the ways that he manages to get exposition in both in the epigraphs, but there's also a couple like the story of Drake and Urchown, which is told through an athletics competition of all things.
Yeah, that was cool.
That was cool. Those are some great examples. And I do love that one half, basically a full half of these epigraphs, are from religious texts. And we get to see how our characters in the story are interpreting these religious texts that we get to see in primary form in the epigraphs. And then we get to see them discuss in secondary and tertiary form or make references to.
Right. Exactly.
In the storyline itself. And it really helps us have that context to understand what they're talking about and what the scrolls are like and how disparate different scrolls of different types are. Like there's the scroll of exile, there's a scroll of redemption, and there's different scrolls. They have different tones. And it's interesting to see which characters strive more closely to uphold certain scrolls compared to others. There's absolutely a hermeneutic lens on Bryn's commentary about this, and I love it. I love it. Okay. I think we should jump into full spoiler territory unless anyone has anything they want to say.
It's hermeneutic. That's a word.
Hermeneutics. Fine.
One word I can pronounce correctly.
I'm glad that there's a hermeneutic lens on this.
So spoilers.
So
spoilers.
All right.
Oh, no, wait. No. One more thing before spoilers. Let's talk a little bit about the planet Jijo or Jiho. Jijo. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the planet Jijo, this fallow world that is covered in camouflage civilization.
Speaking of giving depth to the world, like one of the ways they greet each other is, I hope you have a cloudy sky or something along those lines, because they have this fear of people seeing them on the planet because they're not supposed to be there.
Yeah. On this little postage stamp sized bit of volcanic activity.
Right, exactly. So it's supposed to be fallow, and they're basically hiding from the whole galactic infrastructure. And all of these different species of aliens, they all were running away. The 7, yeah. But they're all running away from something. And then you have the Glavers, who've been there the longest, illegally there the longest, but they have gone into innocence, which means they've basically given up their sapience. And you also have, 8, I guess, if you count the spider things, the mall spiders.
Well, the Glavers were originally the 7th, and now they're not counted as part of the 7. So now there's 6.
Right, but the humans,
the mulch spiders, are not technically sapient.
But one of them talks.
Yeah, we'll get into that later.
Okay, sorry.
That's
Is that a spoiler?
I don't know. Not really. Not really. You're introduced to him as a talking thing. It's fine. But they're not technically sapient, or they're not supposed to be anyways.
Anyway, Era, sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was about to say the mulch spiders are sentience versus that was the discussion of sentience versus sapience. If we assume that the mulch spiders can actually talk, then they're exhibiting sentience and not sapience. And I would say one of the interesting things he does in this book is he talks about how these species who have been uplifted, and I'm thinking about the Glavers here, can essentially deliberately devolve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can humans devolve? Because
we will get into that later.
Right. But I mean, that's kind of one thing.
That was a question that I was going to ask.
The other thing that I think is interesting, and he brings this to the fore, by the time we get to halfway through the book, it's pretty much a front and center issue. You have, on the one hand, galactic civilization treating ecology or environmentalism as commerce or as a currency, versus the settlers who have taken this ethos, environmentalism, and ecology, and it's an ideal in and of itself. It's not meant as a transactional engagement anymore. And I thought that juxtaposition was interesting, and it created the essential tension of the first half of the book.
And it draws an interesting relationship between environmentalism and the reasons, the intent behind the environmentalism, because this book gives a variety of examples of different intents behind it. Some people do it because it's expected of them in their society. Some people do it out of a religious fervor. Some people do it out of a sort of Pascal's wager. It doesn't hurt me if I live this way too much. And if galactic inspectors ever do come down, maybe they'll go more leniently on us if we keep up our environmentalism.
Should we explain Pascal's wager? Because I don't know if people know what that is. I know what it is, but I mean, there
Pascal's
might be
wager is a logical reason for believing in something that may not have a basis in truth.
Right. So the most common one example is to live like there's God, even if you don't necessarily believe that there's a God.
Yes.
Anyway.
In this case, it's taking the form of environmentalism.
Yes.
For the case of galactic inspectors. Live like a galactic inspector is going to find you tomorrow, and maybe they won't judge you so harshly.
I actually really like that part where they're constantly like, well, maybe we should do this. And then if they show up, they won't be as mad at it.
Yeah, as mad at us. They say, maybe we should blow up the dam because, they won't judge us harshly if we blew up the dam. I wish that there was someone who was like, we should drain the dam slowly to not affect the wildlife. That would have been my position on that debate, but whatever. Okay. Let's jump into full spoiler territory. We're going to be discussing anything up until and including chapter 15. Tune out of the episode now if you don't want spoilers. If you're okay with them, keep listening. Okay, let's talk about our main characters. Which of Nilo's kids is the best and why? I'm kidding. There's other main characters, but for me, there's asks. For me, there's asks, and he is the undisputed king of all the characters in this book. And then we can talk about Lark and Sarah and Dwyer.
I want to talk about Alvin because he's my favorite character.
Alvin is lovely too.
He's playful and curious, and I think he's just a great way of looking at this world. And he has all of his little cadre of friends and their little Nor that runs around with them.
Hufu.
Yes, Hufu. And you get to live in his head in a way that you don't, except with Ask.
And his head is such an interesting place.
It really is. He was charming.
If you're going to talk about Alvin, I think it's also important to note his race and his race's propensities. Because to me, it adds to his charm, it adds to his likability. Because he comes from a race that is very patient, they are not humorous, they are not adventurous, they are very deliberate in their conduct. And he is
Alvin is impetuous and suave.
Exactly.
And very funny.
Yep.
He likes to play punning games with his Wheeler friend. I cannot the Kex. All I can think of is the Wheelers from Dorothy or Return to Oz. Did you guys ever see that movie?
I don't think I ever saw that, no.
Okay, so never mind. I'll send you a picture later. Okay. But they're creatures with wheels for legs and arms. So sorry, I just derailed the conversation. I know that's shocking.
I mean, I'm gonna look it up now.
So I guess while he's looking it up, I would say my favorite character is actually the Janus trilogy of Sarah, Dwyer, and Lark, because they all represent different philosophical points of view, kind of in tension to each other. And I like that they're related and they're all in the different goals they're pursuing. And I like that. I mean, look, I like the tension between the three characters.
I like Dwyer as the ultimately practical man. He is the ultimate survivalist in a survivalist culture.
Right. I mean, look, if you think Lark is the thinker, Dwyer is the doer.
Hey, you take that back. Sarah is a thinker too.
Okay, well, I will.
She's a mathematician.
Here's how is it. Lark is the thinker. His head's always in the clouds. Dwyer is man of action. And Sarah's kind of like, I'm going to take my knowledge and use it practically. That was kind of like my impression of the three. Like if Lark's at one end and Dwyer's at the other end. That's so interesting. In the middle.
I think Sarah is way in the extreme. I think Sarah is the most head in the clouds out of all three of them. I think Lark is the practical one because he's a botanist. He's like making textbooks for people, whereas Sarah is out here doing theoretical papers that almost nobody reads.
But he's also...
And wasting large amounts of space on her father's...
Lark is also a nihilist.
I was just going to say.
Sure.
He's a nihilist. He's like, we should all just go the path of redemption and give up our...
They're both heretics. Sarah's is just weirder.
Sarah is someone I would get along with. I think I would want to smack Lark. But
I would say Lark, I assume Bryn did this deliberately. There was an ancient sect of Jews called the Pharisees who believed that the way to get closer to God is A, to follow the text strictly, but B, most importantly, as it relates to Lark, be celibate, do not propagate. That way we get to the end times quicker.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
So-
There's some Christian sects that are like that, or that had that. They died out, unsurprisingly, since they did not propagate.
Yeah.
You have to love the memetics of a sect like that.
Yeah.
Right. But anyway, so those are my three favorite because I think there's just Alvin's great. I agree with everything Red said, but to me, the stories propulse through their different viewpoints and how they're acting in the first half.
Oh, I would also like to add that Alvin and his friends go on a little
Well, not in the first half, they don't.
oops. I guess that's
Okay.
true. I forgot that's in the second half. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, in the first half, they go on a great adventure to Mount Gwen, and we get to see the volcano smithy of Uriel. And that's a fantastic little journey.
And the hidden sage who's all distracted and hey,
Sage
take this engineering
Pirovsky,
construction. Yeah,
who used to be like Sarah's tutor, right?
I think so.
that's
Used
right.
to be
Sounds
Sarah's
right.
mentor.
And I would say generally one of the other things I do like about the book, and I would say this about Bryn's writing generally, because he does this in the Uplift War, and he does it again in Brightness Reef. He takes a pretty small story. If you look at the stories of each of the characters, it's not some terribly grand scale thing. The kids are going on an adventure. Dwarves helping this troubled child get out of a problem with a spider and stuff like that. None of it are like big stakes issues, but he's telling this big stakes story through these small stories. And it's a really hard writing technique to pull off. And I think he does it pretty well in the first half of this book.
And I think it's interesting how central Sarah and Lark end up being to this like driving conflict of the visitors from the stars, given how heretical they're known to be.
That's a great point.
Sarah is entrusted with the stranger, and like the retired sage Ariana Fu is there, and she is very respected, very trusted, maybe a little eccentric, but who cares? And she fully entrusts Sarah with the care, upkeep, and transportation of the stranger to the sages at the glade. And Lark is entrusted with full-on espionage against Ling,
Right.
one of the star humans that the sages themselves are like, we don't know enough duplicitousness to effectively do this, but we're going to try. And they send Lark.
You know what's interesting about that is that it also creates another tension, which I found, which I liked. Lark, for all his heretical beliefs and for all of his in his thoughts, well, maybe the best thing to do is for the pirates to gas us so we're all sterile or some crazy thought like that.
Right.
Yeah.
He's still, his actions contradict his inner thoughts or anything like that, because he is not giving Ling an inch throughout the first half of the book at all.
Lark is full of delicious contradictions, including his little necklace that he wears chipped off of the great egg.
We'll get to
Which
the great
is-
egg in the next part of the book, right?
Such a heretical act, and a selfish one.
What is the egg? I've read this book 1.5 times and I'm still trying to is it a leftover from the people who were
Read and find out. The egg is a recent addition to the slope. It came birthed out of
it's
the
only been
ground.
there 100 years.
Yeah.
Right. And I was wondering if it was a relic of the previous species that before the planet went feral.
It's a giant egg-shaped piece of rock.
I know that. Thanks.
Well, that's all I'm telling you. That is
I think
all I'm
that-
telling you.
And I would also say Sarah is same way as Lark, for despite how much everybody distrusts her, there is one person who trusts her implicitly. The
I'd say
stranger.
there's more than one, honestly.
Yeah.
Her dad trusts her.
Her dad does not
Well, her
trust her.
Oh,
family. I'm not gonna her family trusts her, but
yes. Well, he
outside of the
doesn't
family.
I'd say several people at Byblos clearly trust her, including her scorned lover.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Like, I kind of feel for Sage Tane this time around. Like, okay, maybe I'm a curmudgeonly person who would be lucky to get a mathematician to marry me, but maybe I'm projecting, but I think that Sarah has a whole bunch of friends and allies and people who trust her inside of Byblos, and her self-exile back into her father's town is a character choice and a piece of Sarah's character that hasn't been explained yet, but I'd love to find out more about what it is. Sarah has a past, and I want to know more about it.
I feel like she does not have a correct view of how other people perceive her.
I think that's probably accurate.
Paranoid's not quite the right word, but she had a bad thing that happened.
She's sensitive.
And yeah, she is. She had a bad thing that happened, and now she thinks that everybody's kind of like she's the butt of everybody's joke almost. That's how I felt about it. Like she's hiding because or I don't know.
She was the center of a public scandal.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
So maybe I just bought into her point of view too much because I kind of bought what she was. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that she thinks that that she's much more fixated on what happened than everybody else.
I agree with that. I think that she thinks that she did this horrible thing and that everybody hates her. But I think everybody has forgiven her.
Right.
Not everybody. She hasn't forgiven herself yet.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Everybody except for her has forgiven her. And maybe her father. Her father probably hasn't forgiven her fully yet, but loves her in the best way he knows how.
Can we talk about a character I don't like?
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about Reddy.
I have a lot of sympathy for Reddy. But
I've had enough of resent-filled adolescence in books. I couldn't, like, this time around, I'm like, I'm done. Like, I was like, how fast can I get through these parts? It was uninteresting to me in the least at all. I'm like, oh, wow, look, she's going to try to betray people to advance herself. That's a shock. So, I mean, anyway, I did not care for her at all. And it's not that she was going to betray the people, it's that she was an uninteresting character that took very obvious steps, and I just didn't enjoy it.
Reddy is focused on whatever she can get out of a situation and does not care about what might be the right thing to do because she has to take care of herself.
And she was also horribly abused by her brothers so badly that they burned her face, and she's got horrible scars. I mean, I get what you're saying, Era. I don't like her at all, but I have sympathy for her.
I don't like her, but I understand her, and I think it's a very realistic thing for her to be doing. And we also see through her point of views, especially her last point of view when she goes to meet with the star humans, and she sees that like there's a line of people who are coming up to sell secrets to the star humans in exchange for payment. There's a line, and it happens like every day.
That was an interesting.
And so she's not unusual in the fact that she's trying to get something for herself. What's unusual is that she has a piece of a mechanical bird that's probably at the center of the conflict or mystery of this novel.
I'm not saying you're wrong to feel the way you do, Era, because I get it. And I don't
You guys are speaking Anglic and demonstrating empathy already. I'm speaking Gal too. I couldn't care less. She's useless. I don't care for her. Fine, she had a horrible past.
I'm very happy that she doesn't have many POVs. I'm very happy about that.
I don't like being in her head at all. I do not like her. I totally agree. But I do think she's she seems like a real person who could actually exist. Is all I'm saying.
She's a very realistic person who could exist. I'm glad we get other characters to spend our time with.
Exactly.
I'm glad we get Huck. I'm glad we get Alvin. And we get these teenagers who are optimistic and hopeful and bright and ingenious, and they're playing language games. It's great.
So we're not really disagreeing with you. We're just defending the fact that she's there as a character.
Like, let's note how privileged our band of intrepid little teenagers is, who are developing their own little bath escape with the help of their aunt and like the whole town. Let's talk about how privileged those kids are to be constructing something of great value.
Before we do that, let's let Era some more about I mean, complain
Okay.
some more about Ready.
That's fine. No. We can talk about the privileged kids and all that stuff. That's fine. My only point was I was only going to say that for Ready, we could have cut out her entire storyline, and we just would have had a shorter book. It wouldn't have taken anything away from the story itself. It just felt unnecessary.
That's probably true.
There's one thing I would miss. There's one thing that I would miss. It would be Yi.
Oh, that's right, because we get Yi right at the...
It would be her little Urge husband that hops into her pouch and talks with her. I would miss that.
You didn't like Yi?
No, I like Yi.
No,
I like Yi a
Era.
lot. He's fun. He's interesting. I don't think maybe Era or Drew would like Yi.
I could take it or leave it. It did not advance the storyline at all. I'm fine with having unlikable protagonists. You guys should know this. Everybody should know this.
Yep.
But she was
I know you are.
unlikable and unnecessary. So she had the duo up. So anyways, that was it. Go ahead, proceed to privileged kids.
I mean, how many chapters did she get? She got
like 3.
Her first one is in book 10.
Yeah, she gets 3.
And then her second's in 14. She gets 2 in the first half of the book.
You must have really hated her, Era.
And
then she gets 2 more in the second half of the book.
If you're going to write a book, you have a choice. You can either decide to write a really long book and include every single detail that's necessary and unnecessary, or you can write a more concise book. You guys know I prefer.
I'm not really arguing with you here, Era. Like, no. She is my least favorite part of the book. I think she could be cut.
Yes, I mean,
absolutely.
If she were integral to the story, I would actually be more interested in it. But the fact that she's unnecessary and unlikable, forget it. I'm done. So we can proceed. We can see.
Bryn himself says that if he had to do this book over again, he would have outlined more.
There you go. See, I feel better now. Let's proceed to Alvin and the privileged kids.
Okay. Because I do think that the contrast between Reddy and Alvin's crew is worth drawing regarding their privilege. With the large amount of medical and social care that's provided on the slope in comparison to her horrific band of Sooners, and even more so given the fact that Iran is the niece of Uriel and has the resources of the Forge of Mount Gwen at her disposal, which is the most prestigious forge on the slope. These kids are privileged. And that distinction I do enjoy, even if I don't enjoy reading any of Reddy.
I mean, okay.
If I wanted to say something about it, I guess I could say that it demonstrates one of the downsides to being Sooners is that there's inequality gap that exists again. But I would counter myself by saying this inequality gap exists in galactic civilization too. See how the humans are treated.
Yeah.
And didn't the Sooners basically choose to walk away from the slope?
They did, mostly because they were racist. Like, that's the main reason for Sooners leaving, is because they don't want to coexist with other species.
But my point is that, again, not Reddy specifically, but the Sooners are Sooners because they chose to be, not because you see what I'm getting at, though.
Yes.
And they're not given a way to reintegrate into society. Like, they can't just wander out of the hills and join back up.
I think they can.
I don't think they can. I think that there's problems with that. I think that they have to then, like, betray their whole tribe or whatever. Like, they have to give everybody else up too. Like, they can't, as an individual, come back to society.
I think that in general, record keeping is pretty sparse.
That's true.
And you can just wander in and say, like, oh, I came from so-and-so place, and, like, I decided not to live there anymore, and now I want to make a new life here.
Okay.
It's interesting. I thought where you were going to go with the privileged kids was the whole nature versus nurture argument, because these kids are given all the tools that are available to their society. And we've seen, if you've read Uplift War and Star Tide Rising, how different like alien species are from humans. And then to Red's earlier point, Alvin in the first half of the book is the most relatable, most human, really, of all the characters that we see in the first half of the book. And he's an alien. So I think it's an interesting nature versus nurture, comparing how the aliens on Jijo are versus how the aliens are in the rest of the universe.
And I think that the most important thing to that is the fact that they were raised on human books.
Yeah.
They were
I agree.
raised on Mark Twain. And apparently, that is enough to make your kids human. I can't fight that.
Mark Twain is pretty awesome.
He is. Well, and also there is definitely some nature things going on because the Triaci have to leave rings behind to become who they are now on Jijo.
That's true.
Yeah, like or the Hoon's patience. To your point, you're absolutely right. Right, go on.
Yeah, so like when we're in Ask's head, there's reflection on not only the rings that they had to leave behind, but how those rings would have more fully integrated the rings that they have. Does that make sense? So
absolutely.
That they had to leave behind their egoism, the ring that would have made all of the rings essentially one being. And they gave it up for this kind of communal mind, this communal brain.
You're absolutely right. I agree with you entirely. But I'm going to go on a tangent because where I was going to go was it's interesting to look at this book and how the aliens are acting with basically learning from human culture versus how the other uplifted species are, which it says it in Brightness Reef. They're handed knowledge on a silver platter.
Right.
And it kind of like maybe the light bulb went off this time and I forgot that it went off last time or whatever. But this time around, I'm like, oh, this makes complete sense now. The galactic civilization as a whole are generally, they act like children being handed information. They accept it without consequence or thought. Humans who had to learn their way up the ladder, they're basically at an adolescent stage where they've learned things, but they want to challenge it, learn some more, see if they can improve upon it. Galactic civilization assumes that everything they have is the pinnacle of everything they know. You then get these people from Jijo who have basically adopted the human attitude of, we know what we know, but let's learn more, instead of this childlike acceptance that everything they have is the pinnacle of everything that can be had. So I thought that was a very interesting, like, nurture type of argument that's implicitly being made, comparing what's going on in Uplift Storm at this point versus what we see in the previous book. I don't know what y'all's thoughts are.
There's a great epigraph about that, about the human reverence for culture and for stories, no matter if they're true or imagined.
That's the one that I said was my favorite.
And how when the humans first arrived, they came and cataloged every story they could find and wrote it down in the great printing.
Yep.
Right.
And then there's another epigraph, I think this is a different one, which talks about how humanity introduced the idea of constellations to the rest of the races on the slope.
Yes. Oh, that was so cool. That was really cool.
And how they encouraged imagination. And then, of course, we have the fact that humanity on Jijo controls the library, whereas the exact opposite in galactic civilization.
Do they control it in the same sense, though? Like, I don't think that they refuse people from the library.
They don't refuse people from the library, but they do control access to the books. And I do think that they refuse access to certain books to certain people. And Byblos is definitely the human city. It is the biggest human center of civilization on the slope. And
there's a hint, remember, where other elders are looking at Lester, and I think it's Asks that notes that Lester's hiding something. Don't know what it is.
Yes, that's true too.
So,
yes, you're right.
Yeah.
There's a hint there that, they're pretty open, but maybe not as open as they'd like you to believe.
There's a suspicion of humanity that they are hiding knowledge from the rest of the six.
Well, I'm wondering, at least in part, how much of that has to do with the arrival of the star humans. Like, there was this suspicion that perhaps the humans...
It was their plan all along?
Yeah, exactly. That they were in league with the star humans. That was the feeling that I got, that people were like, wait a minute, they came in and they integrated in our society and they were just waiting for their cousins to show up or whatever.
Yeah.
I thought that was a very interesting conspiracy theory type of thing, because humans, at least the humans that we've seen so far in these books, have not exhibited that type of long-term, because we're talking 1,000-year type of planning to accomplish that. Galactic civilizations, of course, would do that, but not humans.
Yeah, but they don't know that. Like the other steps don't know that about humans, because they just know the immediate the immediate humans that they know.
Yeah. They know that galactic races do think on time scales like that.
Exactly.
And like
Exactly.
there's always a level of distrust that humans actually believe they are wolfling species.
Right.
And this throws that into doubt. Like with the star humans claiming that no, we have a patron and we've known we've had a patron for a long time.
I have questions about that, but we should probably wait to the second half of the book.
Probably.
Well, wait, I have a whole thing about this one. So
Okay.
We're going to save discussion of the Rothan and the Danikites for episode 2. In detail anyways, especially. But
Guys,
it is that is a conspiracy theory which could do so much damage to the Great Peace. And I think that's what Lester finds the scariest, and what Asks finds the scariest concept, is that these star humans, even if they don't directly kill us all, they may reopen the wounds that have just been so recently healed over, because the Great Peace is recent in their history anyways. And
so isn't it like 150 years old or so? It was
in thousands of years of history.
Yeah. So it's before the egg, but not very much before the egg.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
It was just around the time of the egg. 2 rapid fire questions. What is everyone's favorite species from this book and why? I'll go first. It's the Trachea. It's undeniably the Trachea. They are the best. They have a non-unitary form of consciousness, and it is so exciting to read. And they're so snarky about unitary consciousness. They're so snarky about it. I love it. They're like, this might be next to this other crazy thing, like one of the craziest things that unitary consciousnesses deal about. Like, what do they talk about? They say, oh, might have beens. Who has room for might have beens?
I'm just going to go with the Hoon because Alvin's my favorite character in the first half of the book.
That's good.
Sorry.
And they have a love of sailing, which I've got to love, is a lovely romantic concept.
They do. They're boat people.
That's true. I like that's a very kind of human thing, right? That adventure gene.
Yep.
There's that whole very funny thing where Sarah's on the barge with a stranger and they're talking about Hoonish cuisine and what it does to the color of feces in human bodies. It makes it very bright and colorful.
That's interesting.
I just love, like, Bryn throws little things like that in all the time, all throughout his book. They are just like these little moments that are just really funny. They're not all poop jokes.
It's Trachea dietary supplements that make nutrition possible across the slope.
Yes. Okay, so
another way that they are essential and integral to this culture.
Okay, okay. You've
okay,
already sold
Era. What's yours?
Oh, easy. The Gakek, they have wheels. That's awesome.
Wheels and motor spindles are awesome things. Yep.
Dude, they're basically a car. That's awesome. That's all I got. So.
And they have eye stalks, like completely prehensile eyes.
I'm imagining like little snails with like little like motorcycles on little motorcycles.
I thought it was the crab guys that had the eye stalk.
No, they have a cupola.
Oh, okay, that's right.
They have like an omnidirectional band across the top of their body.
That's right.
Across the top of their head. Yeah.
Yeah. I like how they shrug. Speaking again of funny little moments, they shrug by crossing their eye stalks. And what's the other thing that was really funny about them? Oh, I just like, he was suffering from, basically it was rheumatoid arthritis, but it was for axle instead.
Degenerative axle disease. Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought that was funny. Not that somebody's pain is funny. That's not what I mean. But
it's the world is lived in.
Yes.
Yeah. That's always fantastic. Okay. And now let's talk about, actually, I think that's all we need to say for right now. Okay. This has been our episode of the first half of Brightness Reef. And I'm so happy that we're talking about these books. I can't wait to finish the book, the series, everything with you guys. It's been a blast. So if you're interested in joining in on this conversation, you can join us on the Discord, on the Reddit. If you love our episodes, please consider supporting the main Legendarium team on Patreon. It's been fun. Bye.
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 Music is by Jingle Punks, and thank you, Horizon Brave.